All right, welcome. This is Anatomy and Physiology Live. I'm your professor, Dr. Sean Clavel, and today we are talking about some of the energy sources for the body, right? Like how do we use the energy that we consume for work? And so, really, the first thing we'll start by talking about is uh, the energy currency of the cell, which is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And so the energy is located in the bonds of adenosine triphosphate, in the phosphate bonds, right? So the splitting of a phosphate group from the ATP supplies energy for muscle contractions to occur. There's a regeneration of ATP. There's a molecule by the name of phosphocreatine, which contains a inorganic phosphate, which can be transferred from ADP and create ATP. And then macromolecules, like the nutrients we eat, primarily carbohydrates and lipids, provide the phosphorylation by way of oxidation, by breaking it down through our food sources. So, one more time here, as I want to talk a little bit more about the structure of adenosine triphosphate. So, the structure is that of a nucleotide. It's a nucleic acid in its form. So if we break up the four groups, right, you can of the four organic molecules that make up the human body. There's carbohydrates, there is lipids, there are proteins, and then there are nucleic acids. ATP falls under this nucleic acid category. Why? Because it's got three similar components to that of like DNA and RNA. The first is what you can see here, the nitrogenous base. So there's a base that contains nitrogen. There's a pentose sugar. This is a sugar that has a five-sided shape. And then here are the one, two, three phosphate groups in which we contain the high energy bonds. And so ATP can travel throughout the cell. And that's one of the reasons why it's so ubiquitous in terms of energy supply, is that it can travel throughout all areas of the cell and then thus provide energy when needed into different compartments. Oh, wrong way. So the three primary energy sources, fuel sources that are metabolized to produce ATP are going to be carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And for the most part, proteins aren't broken down unless you're in really large needs of starvation. So carbohydrates and fats are going to be our primary sources of energy when it comes to exercise. Now, carbohydrates, as you can see here, have a energy consumption or an energy creation of there's 4 grams of calories per gram, kcals per gram, right? There's 4 grams, there's 4 kcals per gram, excuse me, right? 4 kcals per gram. And this exists in the body primarily as glucose. It travels to the different regions of the body as glucose, and it provides energy for tissues like your brain. Now, glycogen is the densely packed form of glucose, which is in the muscle and liver. So ultimately, what we're going to see, and I'll go to this slide here, is that we can intake. That's what we have here. We primarily intake our glucose through starches in our plants, glycogen in our animals. But then there's disaccharides and monosaccharides, which can be things like the simple sugars we'll see in milk, cane sugar, all fall into these categories here, the disaccharides and monosaccharides, what you might think as simple sugars. The storage unit of glucose in the body is glycogen, and it's stored in the liver and muscles primarily. So that's what you got here. You've got skeletal muscle here in this picture here. So like your pectoralis, your muscles, and why do why is the primary source of glycogen storage muscles, because it requires a lot of energy, right, to move and to do all these different activities that we're used to. So exercise can require a significant amount of energy to the body when it relates to other different tissues. The other one here is this is the liver right here. You can see I'll highlight it in pink. So usually a little bit bigger on the right than the left. Here you have the liver. So two structures that house one and two structures that house primarily most of the stored glucose in the body. Now, fat is a little bit different in the fact that carbohydrates are primarily just an energy source. And so it's stored as an energy source, but lipids have a little bit of a function in terms of like structure. So it gives structure to our cell membranes. It covers our organs and insulates our organs. It's used as an insulator between the skin and the muscle tissue. So fats have kind of a combination of functions. The first being that it is an energy source. We use it for energy when we're talking about exercise, and that is, it provides almost twice as much energy than carbohydrates. But it's a slower process to utilize that energy. So the glucose will be the most not abundant, but it's going to be the first used. Then the broken down glycogen, and then when we get into some more of the longest endurance activities, then we're looking at the utilization of fat. Now, as I mentioned, fat has a dual function. Not only does it provide energy, but it also provides protection, right? It protects all the body organs, it wraps around them, protects them, and insulates them. It also creates the phospholipid, it's the membrane for the cells, and it provides a lot of structure to the body. Move that up a little bit. Now, proteins again provide 4 calories per gram of in terms of energy, but is very limited in its role of energy production. Really, what proteins do is they provide uniqueness to each of the cells in the body. So, the skeletal muscle has very unique proteins in the body that are responsible for causing muscle contractions. Uh, Proteins also act as receptors on the cell membrane. They give structure to the cell membrane. They're ultimately, what is coded for in the DNA that will create all of the necessary components for a cell, right? And so all of the necessary components for the cells are primarily proteins, including things like enzymes. Enzymes are proteins. They are catalysts that bring about a chemical reaction. So they are also responsible for many of the maintenance of the cell's function, particularly the muscle cell in this case. So again, proteins are not going to be a major source of energy when we talk about it. Their function is to provide all the diversity necessary for a cell to function. Now, as I mentioned before, one way to replenish ATP stores in the body is the phosphocreatine system. So, the phosphocreatine system is primarily found in muscle. This phosphate is used to generate ATP from ADP. So if you're using something for a skeletal muscle contraction, that's required, and we'll see that in the lectures related to muscle contractions when we get into that section. But it requires energy for a muscle to contract, and inside that muscle cell there is ATP. There's also phosphocreatine. So once ATP is used, the creatine will I'll highlight into that screen, right? This phosphocreatine or creatine phosphate will release its inorganic phosphate with the use of an enzyme. This enzyme in this case is the enzyme creatine kinase. Again, enzymes are the proteins. Let me highlight that there for you, right? So let's say you have ATP, right? So you've had a muscle that is utilizing the energy, and ATP is created as a result, and it will bind with creatine phosphate. What you get is creatine. That inorganic creatine will then release its phosphate to ATP. To ATP, and we get ATP. And again, the enzyme that houses that is creatine kinase. But there is very limited amount of creatine kinase in the body, so that system wears out. I hate for it to say wears out, but it depletes within, like, 10 seconds, 5 seconds or less. It's for high energy intensity muscle contraction. So phosphocreatine creatine supplementation has been popular over the last decade, and the reason for that is because it provides much more of that phosphocreatine stores, and again, it requires short duration contractions. So we're thinking about powerful moves like weightlifting, right? If you're doing a set of 10 or a set of 12, that would provide you with a little bit extra oomph to do so, but it wouldn't be something that you would utilize for, I don't know, say a marathon. It wouldn't significantly improve marathon performance. Your body actually produces creatine, right? It's produced in the body at 1 to 2 grams per day, and it's also seen in meat, right? The muscle tissue of other animals primarily. And fish and salmon are also rich in creatine, but it can be consumed from those supplements, as I mentioned. And it provides an performance enhancement for short period exercises, short sprints, and weightlifting are primarily the examples that I can think of. Now, just a few notes on some of the other micronutrients that we think about. So things uh, like electrolytes and vitamins, they don't necessarily provide energy themselves, but they're critical enabling the energy producing processes, right? They're critical in creating the environment for optimal energy production. So salts like sodium and chloride, or sodium chloride salt, those ions are there to help create a environment for muscles to ultimately have their for muscles to have utilize the energy, right? Make energy and use it. And so the idea is that vitamins, minerals, salts, anything outside of these organic molecules like carbohydrates and lipids specifically, they don't really provide energy. They provide an environment for that energy to be produced, right? Like water. Water doesn't necessarily provide energy, but it makes up a big consistent part of our cell, and creates the environment for all of those activities to occur. As well, caffeine we say, or like when we have a drink that contains caffeine, it might be an energy drink. Now an energy drink contains carbohydrates, sugar, quite a bit of sugar, but caffeine itself does not provide the energy in terms of energy production for ATP. What it does is it stimulates the nervous system, right? Binds to receptors in the brain, alters the release of neurotransmitters. So it does have benefits in terms of of exercise, whether it's performance for endurance exercise or those short periods for sprinting and power, like we mentioned previously, but it doesn't provide fuel for a muscle contraction. And so, in the next sections, we'll be talking about some of the sources of ATP. We talked a little bit about creatine phosphate, but we'll also talk about the glycolysis and aerobic respiration. So the way that we break down the glucose or fatty acids into the actual into the actual ATP, right? Into the actual energy production. And so we'll take a look at that here in the next lecture. But for now, let's keep that ideas in mind as it relates to the two main organic molecules that are related to providing us energy. Those are carbohydrates. Let's see if I can't click on it. Let's see. Oh, there they go. Those are the carbohydrates and fat, right? Like those are the primary sources by which click through all there. The primary sources by which we utilize energy, right? Carbohydrates are the fast energy source that we can use within. It's housed within the muscle. It's shipped within the bloodstream. It is also stored inside of the muscle and liver in terms of its packed form, its storage form known as glycogen. And lipids are a more robust energy source, I can say, right? Like it provides almost twice as much energy as carbohydrates. However, it is a longer process to use to create energy by way of lipids. So as a result, we use carbohydrates at the early stages of our exercise for sprinting. And as we get into these longer endurance exercises, we start to rely a little bit more on the fat stores. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our next lectures. But let's keep that uh, for another lecture. Take care and stay safe as I continue to record more lectures about energy and its energy sources.